A soft gasp rippled through the global community the moment Paige Corral Howard's voice filled the screen, her revelation slicing through 5 decades of fairy tale adoration like a sharpened blade. "Everyone thinks my parents' marriage was perfect," she began, each syllable carrying a quiet tremor that hinted at decades of restraint finally breaking free. For years, the world had revered Ron and Cheryl Howard as Hollywood royalty, their love story serenaded in award speeches and immortalized on red carpets. Opie Taylor's innocent smile and Cheryl's graceful presence painted a picture of seamless devotion. But behind that glossy veneer, Paige now confessed her parents had come within inches of walking away, at least 3 times. She paused, eyes pooling with memory. "I remember the first night I saw my mom pack her suitcase," she said, voice tightening at the recollection. "She threw it across our bedroom and screamed, 'I can't live like this anymore.'" In that instant, Paige recalled, the entire household froze. The questions, the fear, the unspoken acknowledgement that beneath every family photo lay an undercurrent of unsaid truths. The world had never known that love, so long celebrated, was repeatedly teetering on the brink of collapse. The opening moment of our story sets up a landscape of contrasts. Sunlit anniversaries and midnight pleas, childhood giggles against the backdrop of slammed doors, a director's Oscar speeches shadowed by whispers behind closed doors. As we trace Paige's journey from wide-eyed daughter to courageous truth-teller, we begin to see the real contours of the Howard marriage. 2 brilliant minds, drawn together by youthful dreams, yet pushed apart by jealousy, ambition, and a relentless spotlight. Remember how you thought you knew everything? Think again. Behind every triumphant acceptance speech Ron delivered, Cheryl was struggling to carve out her own identity as a writer. The love letters they exchanged as teenagers brimmed not only with promises of forever, but also with the fear of losing oneself in another's orbit. Ron's path to directorial glory, from American Graffiti to A Beautiful Mind, was paved with Cheryl's unwavering faith, but also with his consuming jealousy whenever she chased her own artistic calling. It was 1975 when they finally tied the knot, an elegant yet unassuming ceremony that friends described as equal parts romance and relief. Henry Winkler teased Ron into laughter as he stood at the altar, but behind the jokes lay the weight of unspoken complications. Within months, Cheryl was pregnant with their first child, and the couple moved into a modest home in Burbank, a place meant to be a haven, but too quickly transformed into a battlefield of unmet expectations. In the beginning, Paige recounts her mother was the picture of support, breastfeeding newborns at dawn so Ron could conquer the next film set, sacrificing her writing workshops to chase screaming toddlers. Yet every evening as Ron reviewed storyboards, Cheryl's own pen lay dormant on her desk, the pages she longed to fill staring back at her as sad reminders of dreams deferred. The first major crack came in the early 80s, when Ron's transition from actor to acclaimed director intensified. Cheryl, now the mother of 2 rambunctious children, sought solace in weekend writing retreats. Ron, already accustomed to constant on-set scrutiny, bristled at the thought of her slipping away, even temporarily. "You'll get lost in that writer's world," he warned her one Saturday morning, his voice low but firm. Cheryl's response was a quiet defiance. "That writer's world is part of who I am," she replied, her eyes betraying both longing and sorrow. Paige watched from the staircase, her young heart echoing the tension between admiration for her father's success and empathy for her mother's silenced aspirations. By the time Cheryl packed that first suitcase, the cracks had become chasms, arguments erupting over misplaced diaries, hushed accusations of neglect, slammed doors that reverberated through the walls like war drums. Paige and her siblings would huddle under blankets, pretending to be asleep while their parents' voices ricocheted in the hallway. "I heard my dad scream, 'You think your dreams matter more than this family?'" Paige said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid of awakening another round of ghosts. It was in those moments of near rupture that Paige began to understand the raw, unglamorous work of sustaining love. The high of premiere nights, the thrill of golden statuettes, those were only half the story. The rest played out behind curtains, in silences so thick they threatened to smother every memory of honeymoon bliss. Yet somehow, between tears and apologies, Ron and Cheryl found their way back to each other, not through grand gestures, but in fragile conversations marked by honesty rather than ego. They learned that love at its core demands patience, forgiveness, and willingness to relinquish control. These lessons seeped into Paige's bones long before she realized their significance. Now, as she stands before us sharing these struggles, she is not merely airing family secrets. She is offering a lifeline to anyone who's ever believed their own relationships had to fit the mold of perfection. If they could almost lose each other 3 times and still come back better, she seems to say, there's hope for all of us. And just like that, we're pulled deeper into the narrative, compelled to witness what happens next when ambition and intimacy collide on the grandest of stages. But the most tumultuous period came in the late 1990s when Ron Howard's career soared to new heights, and Cheryl's voice felt quieter than ever. Following the success of Apollo 13 and the monumental acclaim of A Beautiful Mind, Ron was lauded as Hollywood's gold standard, yet with each thunderous applause came an echo of Cheryl's absence. The world applauded Ron's brilliance while she wrestled with fleeting moments in her own pursuits. It was during this time that Paige noticed an undercurrent of desperation in her mother's eyes, an unspoken plea for acknowledgement that extended beyond her husband's shadow. As Ron attended gala after gala, Cheryl remained at home, hunched over half-finished manuscripts, her ambition tethered by a marriage she loved but sometimes dreaded. The contrast between his public triumphs and her private struggles grew sharper with each passing month. One evening after a especially grueling awards ceremony, Paige found her parents in a silent standoff. Ron was dressed in tuxedo brilliance, medals gleaming around his neck, while Cheryl sat in the dim foyer, her posture rigid with withheld frustration. Without looking at each other, they exchanged only glances loaded with years of unvoiced heartache. Cheryl's hands shook as she held a glass of wine, a gesture meant to steady nerves but betraying the storm beneath. Paige later confided that in that moment, she saw two people who were not only partners but competitors, vying for relevance in their own relationship. It wasn't hatred she saw, but wounded pride and longing. That night, no apology came. Instead, Ron retreated to his study, and Cheryl disappeared into the guest room, each unwilling to bridge the gap. In the wake of that silent rupture, Paige noticed a pattern. Each triumph in Ron's career brought a corresponding silence in the Howard household. Whether it was the roar of success after Cocoon's visual effects defied expectations, or the thunderous applause following the premiere of the Da Vinci Code, Cheryl's absence at public events felt like an unspoken protest. She preferred the shadows, letting Ron bask in the glow of spotlights while she nursed her solitude in quiet hotel rooms. Sometimes, Paige recounted, she would wake early to find her mother's stationery scattered on the desk and her father downstairs rehearsing lines. The harmony of family life fractured under the weight of uneven attention, with one star illuminating the other's fading flame. Yet despite their distance, each maintained a reverence for the other's talents, a fragile respect that tethered them, however loosely, through years of estrangement. Perhaps the most harrowing episode unfolded during the filming of the Da Vinci Code in 2000. Ron was immersed in a whirlwind of location shoots across Europe, surrounded by the intrigue of ancient secrets and global controversies. Meanwhile, Cheryl was back home in Los Angeles, frustrated that her own novel lay gathering dust on the shelf. The distance between them transformed into an abyss when Ron's production team alerted him to Cheryl's sudden disappearance from a family gathering. He had barely spoken to his wife in weeks, and the realization that she might have left him permanently struck him like a thunderbolt. He dropped everything and flew to LA, heart-pounding. What he found was not abandonment but a tightly packed car, Cheryl's journals spread across the back seat, her defiance spelled out in ink. Their reunion that night was equal parts relief and raw confession. In his trembling voice, Ron apologized for neglecting Cheryl's creativity and for allowing jealousy to overshadow their partnership. Cheryl responded with equal candor, revealing how lost she felt in the labyrinth of Ron's fame. Their conversation, recounted by Paige, stretched into the early morning hours, filled with sobs and laughter as they laid bare hopes and regrets. That night marked their third narrow escape from divorce, an escape not born of obligation, but of genuine revelation and mutual determination. They forged a pact. Ron would integrate Cheryl's writing projects into Imagine Entertainment discussions, offering her support and editorial feedback. In return, Cheryl agreed to attend Ron's premieres, reframing them not as threats to her authorship, but as stages for their united triumphs. This mutual agreement became a turning point, anchoring their marriage in shared creative respect rather than silent sacrifices. From that season onward, the Howard household transformed. Paige observed her parents meeting over breakfast to brainstorm story ideas, their voices warm, kind. Family vacations became collaborative retreats, Ron filming Cheryl's poetry readings on Super 8, Cheryl editing his screenplay treatments on sunlit verandas. Tension turned into a rhythm of growth, a flow that underscored mutual respect. Paige smiles now as she recounts how her parents, hand in hand, faced the world not as icons but as partners rediscovered. By the dawn of the 2010s, the Howard family had settled into a rhythm that few would recognize from those early years of storms and near breaks. Ron's name lit up marquees around the world, from Inferno to Ringo Starr documentaries, while Cheryl cultivated a small but devoted readership who cherished her novels. Household debates no longer revolved around jealousy or creative neglect, but centered on which script draft deserved the final edit, and whether Cheryl's latest character needed a more urgent voice. Paige watched this transformation with quiet pride. Her parents had not only survived but had come to flourish in their intertwined vocations. Whereas tension once crackled like static through the walls, now warmth radiated from every shared glance and collaborative nod. It was in 2012, after the premiere of Rush, that Paige realized how deeply her parents had redefined partnership. Instead of the old pattern, Ron whisking through press junkets while Cheryl waited at home, she saw them stride the red carpet together, arm in arm, each introducing the other with genuine respect. Interviews that once focused solely on Ron's directorial genius now included thoughtful inquiries into Cheryl's writing process, cementing her status as more than just the director's wife. Fans who followed Ron's social media feeds praised Cheryl's wit and insight, and literary circles began to notice her storytelling flair. The world had shifted, and the Howards embraced it, their love no longer a backdrop to fame but a beacon of mutual celebration. Of course, the inevitable challenges never fully vanished. Parenthood evolved as well. Now that several grandchildren had joined family dinners, the question of legacy took center stage. Paige remembered a moment when her father sat under an oak tree in their Burbank garden, grandkids tugging at his coattails, and he looked at Cheryl and whispered, "We did it." Cheryl squeezed his hand, tears glimmering in her eyes, the past suddenly catching up in a rush of emotion. Not because they had escaped divorce yet again, but because they had built something lasting, something that extended far beyond film sets and bookshelves. That lasting testament lay in the laughter of children and the quiet satisfaction of creative fulfillment. In telling this chapter of the Howard saga, Paige paused to reflect on what had truly shifted. It wasn't just professional balance or public perception. It was a subtle acceptance that love is dynamic, an evolving equation that can't be solved once and for all. Some days, she said, her parents still disagreed, perhaps about financial decisions at Imagine Entertainment or the direction of a minor plot twist in Cheryl's latest manuscript. But instead of slamming doors, they convened in the kitchen over coffee, mending conflicts with frank talk rather than emotional artillery. When passion flared, it no longer threatened to explode. Instead, it sparked conversations that led to deeper understanding. As viewers hear Paige recount these intimate moments, the contrast with the tumultuous early years feels almost cinematic. We envision montage sequences of sun-soaked porch chats and scribbled notes passed across mahogany tables. We sense the rhythmic cut between courtroom drama film shoots and midnight typing sessions in Cheryl's study. This delicate balance crafted the most compelling plot of all, the story of a marriage that reinvented itself over half a century. It's a narrative that speaks not only to Hollywood royalty, but also to anyone who's ever wrestled with giving and receiving support in equal measure. By centering their story on authentic communication, Ron and Cheryl transformed potential divorce triggers into opportunities for growth. There was no prescribed formula, no step-by-step manual titled Surviving 50 Years in the Public Eye. Instead, they discovered that the secret lay in celebrating individual triumphs as shared victories and treating setbacks not as personal failures but as invitations to reconnect. It meant acknowledging jealousy not as a barrier but as a signal to listen, and viewing disagreements not as threats but as doorways to greater intimacy. In a world obsessed with perfection, this method of imperfect harmony became their trademark, a model that resonates far beyond the Howard household. In the fall of 2018, when Ron was offered the chance to direct a Star Wars standalone, and Cheryl had just published her third novel, they faced one of the rare misalignments in recent memory. Ron's schedule demanded months of location shooting in Atlanta, while Cheryl had planned a book tour across Europe. Instead of defaulting to past patterns, Cheryl stepping aside or Ron forsaking his passion, they forged a bold compromise. Cheryl enlisted a handful of trusted colleagues to handle her tour appearances, while Ron scheduled his edits and dailies to sync with morning Skype sessions where they'd share their day's revelations. It wasn't an easy solution. Time zone shifts and jet lag tested their patience, but it illustrated their commitment to win-win outcomes. When fans later asked Cheryl how she managed to write under the pressure, she laughed and said, "I was typing between lightsaber duels and starship sets. If that's not inspiration, I don't know what is." In many ways, this period represented the culmination of lessons learned over decades. When you witness someone negotiate creative priorities with genuine curiosity, when you overhear late-night phone calls where a director and an author map story arcs across continents, you realize the Howard's marriage is defined not by grand gestures but by patchwork threads of everyday devotion. Love, they show us, is found in calibrating two brilliant minds to the same wavelength while allowing them the freedom to roam. It's in the gentle art of checking boxes. Did you eat? How was your meeting? It's in the small rituals. I left your favorite tea downstairs. Or I recorded your text with the dog barking in the background, loved it. These micro-affirmations created a macro-resilience that no Hollywood hurricane could dismantle. Today, as Paige stands before audiences sharing these memories, she hopes to challenge the narrative of perfection that follows her parents. She invites viewers to embrace the messy, beautiful reality behind every icon. Love that evolves, falters, and rises anew. And in that invitation, she offers more than a story. She offers a map for anyone seeking to transform challenges into growth. When Paige's video went live early on a Thursday morning, an electric charge rippled across the internet. Fans who'd long admired Ron and Cheryl Howard for their polished red carpet appearances felt the ground shift beneath their feet as Paige spoke candidly of fear, sleepless nights, and near dissolution. Social media timelines flooded with stunned emojis and comment threads that stretched for miles. "I thought they were unshakable," wrote one user. "This changes everything," typed another. News outlets raced to craft clickbait headlines, promising even darker revelations. And by noon, the Howards were trending worldwide, not for blockbuster triumph or award acceptance, but for exposed vulnerability. Overnight, the family's narrative pivoted from Hollywood fairy tale to raw human drama. In forums and DMs, viewers debated every detail. Was Ron's jealousy realistic or controlling? Did Cheryl bear unfair blame for seeking independence? Between supportive messages, "Thank you for your honesty," and skeptical quips, "Why air private pain?" a deeper conversation took hold about authenticity versus image in a culture that devours celebrity polish to perfection. Amid the frenzy, families everywhere recognized reflections of their own struggles. The same tension that bubbles under the Howard household surfaced in living rooms and shared apartments. Partners whispered regrets, siblings recalled slammed doors past midnight, and friends texted gifs of panic at suitcase-throwing reenactments. Suddenly, Ron and Cheryl were no longer distant Hollywood royalty. They had become mirror images of couples grappling with respect, jealousy, and unspoken longing. Overnight, Paige's revelation became less about scandal and more about solidarity. Fans found themselves cheering not just for the film director or the supportive spouse, but for the everyday heroism it took to speak up. Across comment sections pregnant with empathy, people admitted their own near breaks. Marriages saved at the 11th hour, friendships renewed after apologies long overdue, chapters of life where fear nearly eclipsed hope. What made Paige's disclosure so powerful was its intentional contrast framing. She paired shimmering memories of teenage love letters and wedding day laughter with retellings of closets slammed, diaries rifled, and nights curled in fear of familial fracture. This juxtaposition created an emotional resonance that transcended simple tabloid fodder. As her narrative unfolded, viewers felt the vertigo of love's highs and lows, the heady rush of first dates followed by the deadening crash of heartfelt rejection. It encouraged audiences to slip beyond voyeurism into self-reflection. Where had they glossed over the cracks in their own relationships? What truths had been buried in closets or hidden behind polite smiles? In offering her parents' story with unvarnished honesty, Paige handed viewers a lens to examine their own romantic and familial bonds in an entirely new light. In the wake of the video's release, the Howard family issued a brief joint statement expressing gratitude for the outpouring of support and a commitment to continue sharing lessons learned. But the real impact lived in the ripple effect. Couples scheduled date nights to rekindle communication, writers found courage to pursue long-forgotten drafts, and families across continents used the hashtag #RealLoveLives to post snapshots of everyday imperfections, burnt dinners, mismatched socks, hasty notes left on pillows. Paige's revelation ultimately became a catalyst for collective healing. The very imperfections that once threatened to tear her parents apart became the glue binding them now and inspiring countless others to embrace the messy, beautiful truth of human connection. Long after the dust settled, the Howard family noticed that the tremors Paige's confession had triggered continued to pulse through their daily routine. Rather than retreating behind the protective walls of privacy, Ron and Cheryl found themselves invited into living rooms around the globe, their lives transformed into lessons in resilience. Inbox after inbox filled with heartfelt messages from couples who admitted that hearing of the Howards' near breakups gave them permission to speak their own truths. A teacher in Ohio wrote to say she used their story to help students open up about family conflicts. A young screenwriter from Mumbai confessed that Cheryl's prologue inspired him to finish the novel he'd abandoned years earlier. Therapists reported that their clients referenced the Howard narrative as a catalyst to overcome fears of vulnerability. In countless online forums, people dissected the duality of cinematic glamour and domestic reality, fascinated by the human drama that existed beyond profile pieces. For Ron, This newfound connection to ordinary lives was both humbling and liberating. The director, known for sweeping camera movements and poetic pacing, began to infuse interviews with raw honesty. He spoke about the late nights negotiating tantrums in front of green screens, the awkward apologies exchanged over crumpled scripts, and the fear that his ambition would cost him the woman he loved most. When asked about his next project, he leaned forward, eyes shining, and said, "There's something poetic in knowing that the best stories aren't confined to a set. They live between real people, in moments of reconciliation." The man who once preferred his life to be carefully rationed now embraced vulnerability as a source of strength, a message that resonated deeply with fans who had followed his decades-long career. Cheryl, too, discovered a fresh chapter unfolding. Her now-financed second novel, once shelved out of fear that fame would drown her voice, surged to the top of global bestseller lists after she released it, accompanied by a candid introduction. Readers connected deeply to her threads of identity, autonomy, and the courage to stand by someone even while preserving selfhood. Literary critics praised the work's raw emotional honesty, calling it a modern classic. But beyond awards and headlines, Cheryl measured success by the letters she received. A mother who read her book to heal family rifts, a retiree who rediscovered a passion for writing, a teenager who felt seen. For a writer who once wondered if the world would listen, that affirmation felt more glorious than any red carpet. Inside Imagine Entertainment, the couple's production company, the revelation had its own ripple effect. The boardroom, once dominated by discussions of box office forecasts, transformed into a creative think tank where Ron and Cheryl alternated spotlight roles, advocating for projects that honored both blockbuster appeal and authentic human stories. Trainees observed the couple dissect character motivations as if crafting their own relationship. On set, cinematographers noted that scenes once composed for spectacle now lingered on subtle glances and unscripted laughter. Actors remarked that ad-libs capturing genuine emotion made into final cuts. The ethos became clear: authenticity over veneer. Even rival studios began studying this model, seeking to imbue their own productions with a similar resonance.